Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tuesday afternoon. It's time for Close of Business. We have a phenomenal guest today. We're very lucky to have Admiral Bill McRaven. He's a 37-year veteran of the U.S. Navy. He's a decorated servant of the country. His accomplishments are incredibly long and incredibly interesting. And when we thought about who could talk to us about today's world geopolitically, leadership-wise, and just staying focused, we couldn't think of anybody better than four-star Admiral Bill McRaven. So before we jump in with the Admiral, we're going to go real quick, guys. Mike, Bradley, and Colin, you guys have been watching the commodities markets. We're into earnings seasons now. Mike, what's the quick spin?
Well, I'd say that crude oil sentiment right now looks kind of blah. And the reason why it's kind of blah is because demand is essentially going sideways. We've seen that from TomTom data. We've seen that from airline type data. So, and what we've been talking about probably consistently for the last 2 years is kind of follow the crude oil time spreads. And what we're seeing with time spreads is they're starting to roll over, which is telling you that the market is not as undersupplied as we would have thought a couple weeks ago. So, demand is going sideways. Crude oil price has gone sideways. And I think what you've seen is one of the reasons why crude oil prices probably held up here in the face of time spreads going lower is I just think there's a migration of monies towards commodities. You've seen that with gold. You've seen that with silver. You've seen Bitcoin go up. And so I think there's some risk here if the dollar starts to move the other way, which is appreciate, you're going to start to see some money come out of those type commodity trades, and the real fundamentals of crude oil will start to show themselves. So that's a concern that we have, at least right now. As it relates to energy sentiment going into Q2 earnings, it's been the same for Q1 earnings and energy in general. Energy volumes have all fallen off a cliff, and the reason why is it's 2.6% of the S&P. I looked at the data the other day. It's an estimation, but about 10% of monies have come out of hedge funds over the last year. You've seen like energy as a percent of the S&P is at 2.6%. It was almost 5% a year ago, and as a percent of market cap, it's down 45% over last year. So energy is just a smaller component. There's been a lot of volatility in the energy markets as well as the overall market, and when you have all that volatility in such a small percentage, the amount of gross downs is really, really apparent in energy.
Let me do one thing while you're on it, because you mentioned the latest demand data. Matt, you and the team have been looking at the latest demand data. I know you had some that came out today. Do you want to hit that right now?
Our refining team is really closely tracking a number of different indicators from gasoline to jet fuel. This morning we published our weekly jet fuel report, which essentially walked through data points on 3 different sources around how people are traveling. And what we've seen is with the spike in COVID, not only in the U.S., some flare-ups in other regions like India and China, jet demand is actually stagnating and falling in the region. And so depending on which data source you're looking at, we've seen about a 10% drop week over week on global flights. And we've seen the TSA passenger data, which is associated with U.S. passenger travel, down about 0.5%. So things are starting to potentially see a bit of a weakness in the backdrop here for jet demand. And then concurrent with that, we're also watching the gasoline market. And some of the data we're watching there is also suggesting a bit of slowdown in demand. And as Mike and Colin have mentioned, we're probably going to go through a consolidation phase here where we just need to see demand stabilize and start to recover potentially in the back half of the year, especially if we get to a point where vaccine is a viable solution for the virus.
So Colin, picking up on some of Mike's comments, the commodities markets in general, particularly gold, silver, et cetera, have been rallying. You mentioned it last week. It's still happening. What would you tell us this week?
Yeah, Maynard, I've got a couple of charts to share on that point. If you look at the price of gold, for the past 10 weeks or so, we've been predicting that you would see this avalanche of monetary and fiscal stimulus end up in the precious metals. You can see back on the May 12th episode, we were at 1698. We were at 1817 per ounce last week, 1975 today. And in fact, in the forward curve, we're even seeing prices above $2,000. When we look at silver, last week we were at 2012. And remember, as we recorded that day, we were up 7%. Today we breached $26 per ounce in silver. That's a 30% advance within the week. In Bitcoin, as recently as May, we were at 8,600. Today, we breached 11,000. That's 24% for the advance since last week's close of business, 32% since May 12. And if you look on the right-hand side here, you can see that we're really approaching the linear trend that's been intact since 2015. That implies a price of about $13,000. And of course, what's really happening here is we're seeing the collision of very, very low interest rates with rising inflation expectations. So negative real rates in the 5-year U.S. Treasuries and beyond. In fact, we've had a negative 5-year real yield since March 24th, and we've seen the U.S. dollar shed more than 8% since mid-March. We talked a bit about negative yield also being around the world, and you can see since mid-March, the open interest of sovereign debt issued to yield a loss at maturity, so literally you are paying to lose money, has gone from 7.7 trillion to 15 trillion as of last week, and we're seeing a lot of this money slosh over to the 6 major money centers in terms of U.S. Treasury holdings. That's collateral for tax-deferred strategies. And you can see that number as of May was up 133 billion year over year. Now, what's interesting is this increase in the precious metals is not yet showing up in the average price for jewelry. In fact, in June of 2020, average prices for jewelry were down about 7.8% year over year. And that's consistent with what we're also seeing across more retail channels, particularly for apparel. But where we are seeing this inflation begin to emerge in the real economy is in things like potato chips. Those of you who have followed our research for a while know that we love potato chips as a inflation indicator because it is such a mark of indifference. I challenge you to go to your friends and neighbors and have them guess within 10 cents how much they actually pay for one of these 1.5 ounce bags of potato chips that comes with our sandwiches. And yet, just within the past couple of months, that price has gone from 43 cents to 48 cents for one of these little bags. And that is clearly a sign of inflation. Now, yeah, you could argue that part of it is all of us are at home and we're eating more junk food, but really when we normalize for other things, other consumer products, such as the price of beer, you can see that there is across the range of consumer products a bit of inflation, but nothing like the 10% move we're seeing in potato chips. So our assessment is that this is the first real sign of that monetary inflation colliding with the real economy.
So there was a lot in there, Colin. We're going to jump ahead, and I'm pretty impressed that your spectrum, you found jewelry prices and potato chip prices. I'm thinking your wife has a birthday in June. That's why you knew that that's why you're watching that so closely.
You're not so far off. August, my man.
let me ask you one last question, guys. The dollar, I think Goldman Sachs had a report talking about maybe the dollar is not going to be the global reserve currency. All this spending is starting to add up. All this borrowing is starting to add up. Does that mean we're going to see an oil price tick up, or what are you guys thinking about the dollar in particular?
I think it's a stretch to say the United States dollar would not be the reserve currency. I would expect that to be the reserve currency for a long time. And as we showed in that chart, the Europeans are issuing all that negative debt, negative yielding debt. I think the real story is we are just running up massive deficits worldwide. And so it's not even so much a dollar story as it is an anti-currency story more broadly that will help commodities, and it likely will eventually get into oil prices, but not before we see some return of the demand that Matt was describing.
I have noticed the convenience store near my house, on the ATM machine, they post the daily Bitcoin price. I'm not sure what to make of that, but all right, let's move on. Thank you guys for the lead-in. Admiral McRaven, we're so excited to have you. As I mentioned in the intro, your accomplishments as a 37-year member of the Navy, the mission to capture bin Laden, the mission to capture Saddam Hussein. You've done so many things, and you saw the military from the 70s when you joined up through recently when you retired, so it was a historic period. If I could, I want to jump in on one question that I find interesting. You think back to Pearl Harbor, and Pearl Harbor was this momentous event, and I happen to know, just because I stumbled across the history, one of the first things that Nimitz did when he grabbed the team at Pearl Harbor is he said, okay, guys, whatever happened here, forget it. It's time to move on. And there was no finger pointing. There was no blaming. The country had been attacked, and they came together, and within 4 or 5 months, they had Midway. You can see I've had too much time on my hands. But I guess my question for you as a military man and as someone who knows you've got to work together to achieve goals, as you watch the country right now, we are not working well together, and it has to be showing up in our results. What are your observations on how we can come together to do a better job as a nation right now to attack our problems?
Yeah, thanks, Maynard. First, thanks for extending the invitation today. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to join you. Yeah, I think as you look around the world, it can be pretty disconcerting. But I think if you take a look at the span of history, you don't have to go too far back. I mean, you can go back to the 60s and you see the upheaval that the Vietnam War caused, the rioting in the streets, the fiscal policy and the problems we had with that. Yeah, I'm actually pretty hopeful. We will come out of this. This being both the pandemic and the social upheaval, and I think the lack of global leadership, and I think we may end up being stronger as a result of it. But we need to come out of it quickly. And to your point about working together, I get frustrated at times because I see a lack of bipartisanship on behalf of the American people. And today we seem to have chosen sides. And the lawmakers in particular forget that their responsibility is to us and American people. It's not to the Democrats. It's not to the Republicans. It's not to the independents. It's to the American people. And I wish we could find some way to convince them that it does no good to sit around and accuse and point fingers at the expense of getting the pandemic straight, at the expense of resolving some of the issues we have with the social injustice, and frankly, getting America to lead on the global stage. I was listening to the comments before I turned on my video, and I would offer that a lot of the problems we have globally, frankly, in the financial markets and elsewhere, is the fact that nobody sees America leading globally anymore. And when there is a lack of confidence in the United States of America, there is a lack of confidence in the world. When other countries feel like they may have to turn to China or Russia for leadership, that really undermines, I think, everything about the global situation. The point about the dollar being the reserve currency. I agree with Colin. I don't see the dollar going away as a function of the reserve currency. But make no mistake about it, there are a lot of people out there that are wondering where America is, and so. My hope is that we can find a way to lead on the energy, lead on finance, lead on the environment, lead on social issues globally. Yeah, I saw a quote the other day from de Tocqueville, who, as you know, kind of studied America, and he had this great quote that said, "America is great because they are good, and if America wants to continue to be great, they are going to have to continue to do good." This point is, we're the good guys. People see us as the good guys. After World War II, it was the Americans that came in, that rebuilt Europe. After the battle against the Japanese, we came in, we became friends with the Japanese, and we helped rebuild Japan. This is who the world thinks we are. Now, as we retreat behind the borders, they're wondering, where are you? And so I do worry about it, but it all starts at home first. We have got to get people working together. We've got to solve our own problems at home, but then we've got to very quickly reach out and show the world that we can lead again.
One thing, and you've made some very thoughtful comments about, as frustrated as we all get with the press is a fundamental freedom, and we have to have it, and we can never not embrace that. I think the thing we all probably know at some level is the press can sometimes make it look a little worse than it is. I thought in the pregame, in thinking about what we might talk about, when you have discussed in your book, Sea Stories and in interviews, when you've discussed the raid to capture bin Laden, it was clearly that story about it being a 40 to 60% chance. That was clearly a very gutsy thing. And you mentioned you were surrounded by people, who were just trying to do the right thing. And I just don't think the American people honestly hear enough about all the great things that are happening. But would you mind touching on just that raid? Because it fascinates all of us, and the guts it took to make that call and then to make it happen.
Yeah, the one thing that I think, irrespective of who's in the White House, national security has always been a bipartisan issue. And I can tell you, having served in both the George W. Bush, I was on the National Security Council staff under Bush, and then, of course, I was one of President Obama's commanders after 9/11. And I will offer that in the Situation Room, where I spent a lot of time, the people inside the Situation Room, Republican or Democrat, they just wanted to do what was right for America. Now, they didn't always get it right. And I will tell you, I didn't agree with either man on a whole lot of issues. But there was always a sense that they were working hard for the American people. On the bin Laden raid, for me, it started off in December of 2010 when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, came to visit me in Afghanistan. And he told me that the CIA had a lead on bin Laden. And candidly, I was a little dismissive because we'd had a lot of leads on bin Laden. The unit I commanded was kind of in charge of tracking down those leads, and they always ended up as a dry hole, as we say. There was nothing there. So he said, hey, look, CIA could call you, and if they do, kind of go back and chat with them. So about 3 weeks later, I got a call to go back to the CIA headquarters, and I talked to the deputy director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, and he shows me the compound. And if you've seen pictures of the compound, it was kind of this trapezoid-shaped compound, 12-foot high walls in certain areas, 18-foot high walls, 3-story building in the middle of it, and a bunch of other little outer buildings. And I remember Morrell saying, hey, if you guys had to do this, how would you take down this compound? So it's what we do. I mean, we do it every night. We did 25 missions a night in Iraq. We do about 10 to 12 missions a night in Afghanistan. And to give you a sense of a mission, you take about 50 or 60 SEALs and Rangers, you put them on about 5 or 6 big helicopters. You fly from a forward operating base to, an hour and a half out. You land the helicopters, you get out, then you patrol, you march for about 15 kilometers so the enemy doesn't hear you coming. You get to the compound, you surround the compound, the Rangers set up in blocking positions to keep the compound from being prosecuted from the outside. Snipers get up on top, you call out the bad guy, you get the bad guy, and then you get back on a helicopter and go home. We did that 10 to 12 times a night in Afghanistan, various units, but within the Special Operations Community. So I looked at the compound, I said, look, this is what we do. Well, make a long story short, over the course of the next 4 months, I had 6 or 7 meetings with the president and his team, and it was a small group. It was the president, the vice president was in there, obviously. Secretary of State was Secretary Clinton. Secretary of Defense was Bob Gates. Admiral Mike Mullen was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Jim Clapper was the director of National Intelligence. Leon Panetta was the director of CIA, and then we had a number of other folks that sat around the table. But a pretty small group. And I was, as a 3-star admiral, I was the junior guy in the room. And every time we had a meeting, the president would turn to Leon Panetta, the director of the CIA, and say, well, Leon, what do you think? And Panetta would say, well, sir, there are, probably half the people in the CIA that are cognizant of this intelligence think that it's bin Laden, and frankly, the other half don't. And the CIA, and this will go down as one of the great missions, I think, in the history of the CIA, but we had a lot of intelligence, we had overhead intelligence, we had technical intelligence, we had human intelligence, but we still couldn't determine whether or not this guy that came out every day at noon and walked around, whether or not he was bin Laden. So I remember the last meeting I was in with the president, which was in late April, he had asked the director of the National Counterterrorism Center to kind of check CIA's homework. And he asked the guy, he said, hey, you've reviewed CIA's intelligence. Do you think that it's bin Laden? And the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Mike Leiter, said, well, Mr. President, we think that the chance that it's bin Laden is anywhere between 60% and 40%. And when he said 40%, I'm thinking, well, this mission's over. Who in the world would authorize, 24 Navy SEALs to fly 162 miles into Pakistan to hit a compound that was in a built-up suburban area? that was about 3 or 4 miles from their West Point, 3 or 4 miles from a major infantry battalion, a mile from a police station. And oh, by the way, the Pakistanis have nuclear weapons. Who would make that? Who would make that call? Who would decide to do that? Well, I told the president, I said, sir, I'm going to head to Afghanistan. If you decide to go, we'll be ready. If you decide against it, I got a lot of bad guys in Afghanistan. I'll kind of get back to work. So that was on a Wednesday. I flew to Afghanistan on a Friday. I get a call on a Friday from Leon Panetta, and he says, President's made the decision to go. And I remember thinking, wow, that is a gutsy decision. And I've told folks, look, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. This was a very bold decision on the part of the president in light of the fact that at best it was a 50-50 chance. Well, the next day the president calls me in Afghanistan, and I'd rolled the mission 24 hours. We had a little fog in the valley, so I held off. And he said, well, Bill, what do you think? I said, well, Mr. President, if he's there, we'll get him. He said, if not, we'll come home. The hard part about the if we're not, we'll come home scenario is that I had told the president, look, if the SEALs get on target and somebody comes out with a gun, it's not going to go too well for them. And if another guy comes out with a gun, the SEALs will take him out. And if they begin to sweep through the target, they go to the first floor of this 3-story compound, and they kill guys, they kill the guys on the second floor, and they get to the third floor, and the guy they thought was Osama bin Laden turns out to be nothing but a tall Pakistani. This will be a disaster of epic proportions. I didn't tell the president that, but he knew that because we'd had this conversation. So again, you go back to, kind of the daring, the bold moves that sometimes you have to make. That was a pretty remarkable decision on his part.
Well, and all of us love the movie Hoosiers, and I saw that you grabbed the guys and you pulled a Gene Hackman on the team and said, hey, it's 10 foot. It's just like our gym back in Hickory. So even though we're going to Pakistan to get the world's most wanted terrorist, it's just a routine mission.
Yeah, this was we had a final brief. We do a very large, full mission brief, and it takes about 3 or 4 hours. Everybody on the mission kind of goes through, I'm Chief Petty Officer Jones, here's what my role is, I'm Lieutenant Smith, here's what my role is. And everybody goes through the helicopter pilot's briefing, the back-enders briefing. But at the end of it, the coach, the commander's got to get up, and you're hopefully going to say something inspiring to the troops. I hadn't really thought about it until about a minute before the brief was over. I thought, oh yeah, it's my time to say something. I happen to be a big basketball fan, and a lot of the guys, we used to get together on Sunday and play basketball at the motor pool. So I brought up the Hoosiers movie, and as you pointed out, Maynard, it's about this small town basketball team that goes to Indianapolis to play on the big stage. And I said, and I kind of recite the, Gene Hackman, the coach of the small team, has them measure out the court, measure the height of the basket. And then what I told the guys was, look, you guys have all been on missions 100 times before. I kind of hand-selected the commander, and every one of these guys was an extensive combat veteran. I said, you've all done it before. Just do your job. Play the game the way you're used to playing it. We'll all be fine.
One more thing about that I thought was a great story was when you and the president were talking and you had come up with a plus or minus way to measure the target, and then so it's a funny story. I'll let you tell it, but we need more humor in today's world. So tell us that story and tell us why we can't all laugh a little bit more in everyday life.
Well, it was so the mission, we had gotten the word from the guys on target that they had bin Laden. The ground force commander had radioed me back about 15 minutes into the mission. For God and country, Geronimo, Geronimo, Geronimo. So Geronimo was the code word for bin Laden. But it was still another hour and a half, almost 2 hours before the guys got back across the border. And I felt I could relax a little bit because the Pakistanis started figuring out what was going on, and they started moving some F-15s, airborne, a lot of other things. But we finally kind of got back over the border. And by this time, if you've seen the iconic picture of the president and his staff in that small room, so he's on a video conference with me, much like we are talking here. And he says, well, Bill, do you know for certain whether or not it's bin Laden? I said, no, sir, I don't know, but I'm going to go check. The airfield was about 3 or 4 minutes from my little makeshift command center. So I said, give me a few minutes, I'll go check, and I'll get back to you. So I left the command center, got in a vehicle, drove to the airfield. About that time, the SEALs were landing, and the body was in a rubberized body bag. And they brought the body bag off, put it in the hangar, and I got down on one knee, unzipped the body bag, and without getting too graphic, he obviously didn't look too good. He had a couple rounds in his head, and beard was a little bit shorter than what you're used to. But I unzipped the body bag and took a close look at him, and I was pretty certain it was bin Laden. But the one thing I knew was that bin Laden was about 6'4". Well, I'm 6'2", and I thought, well, I'll stretch him out. And again, without getting too graphic, I pulled the body out of the body bag and kind of stretched the legs out. And I thought, well, I'm 6'2". Maybe I could lie down next to him, make sure the remains are a little longer. I thought, that probably doesn't look real graceful, the 3-star admiral lying down next to the remains. So I saw some young kid nearby, and I said, hey, son, how tall are you? Looked at me kind of funny. He said, well, sir, I'm 6'2". I said, good, come here. So the kid comes over, and I said, I want you to lie down. He goes, I'm sorry, what? I said, I need you to lie down. But he immediately realized what I was doing. So he lay down next to the body, and the remains were a couple inches longer. I didn't really think much of it. I said, thanks, and got back in the vehicle, went back to my little command center, and the president was waiting on the video conference, and he goes, well, what do you think? And I said, well, sir, I still need to do some DNA tests, and and I explained some things. I said, but I'm 99% sure it's bin Laden. And I said, no, by the way, I said, I had some young kid who was 6'2" lie down next to him, and the remains were 2 inches longer. And there's this pause on the other end of on the video, and he says, okay, Bill, let me get this straight. We had $60 million for a helicopter. As you recall, we lost a helicopter on the raid. He said, we had $60 million for a helicopter, and you didn't have $10 for a tape measure? And I told folks, I said, it had been a serious night, serious implications, but that was just kind of that one moment in time, a little bit of levity, and, it just kind of brought the pressure down a little bit. I thought the comedic timing was perfect. Like I said, it had been a serious moment with a lot of implications, but it was a nice touch. Fast forward, the next day I got on an airplane and had to go back to the States. I had to testify before Congress. And when I'm up on Capitol Hill, my aide comes up to me and says, hey, sir, the White House called. They want you to come over. The president wants to say thanks. I said, okay. So I got through with the briefing the Capitol Hill, and I drove over to the White House and go into the Oval Office, and the president says, hey, Bill, thanks, congratulations, well done. He says, I got something for you. And he reaches behind the president's desk, and he pulls out a plaque. And on the plaque is a tape measure, and it says, from President Barack Obama to Vice Admiral McRaven, if we have $60 million for a helicopter, we ought to have $10 for a tape measure. Next time, bring the tape. And in fact, the plaque is right over here.
That's so fun.
Admiral, you've spoken a bit about your experiences training to become a SEAL, and it seems like not only humor, but also singing and humility can break some of that tension too. I wonder if you could just share with us some of the lessons you've learned about how to build trust within a unit to accomplish those kinds of missions.
If you don't have a sense of humor in the SEAL teams, you are not going to last very long. And I would offer that it applies probably across the military. But from day one that you show up at a team, particularly if you're a new guy, it's like being the rookie on a sports. You are going to get harassed. They are going to question everything from your parentage to your girlfriend to the uniform you wear. And if you don't have a thick skin, if you don't have a quick retort, it's going to be a long tour for you. So this is kind of part of the culture of, I think, the special operations community in particular. And there's a recognition that humor has a place. When you are in the toughest times, you want somebody to say something that's got a little bit of humor to it. You can fight fear, and you can fight, anxiety, and you can fight a lot of things with a well-placed joke. And it also, of course, as a commander, it humanizes you. If you can make fun of yourself in front of the troops, they realize, you're not a jackass, that you're kind of one of them, and you're okay with being laughed at a little bit, and that makes you approachable. And from a leadership standpoint, you want to be approachable. You want the young soldiers to come up and feel like they have a connection with you, because if you're not approachable, they're not going to tell you when things aren't going well. If they think that you are some sort of martinet, or that you're too powerful, and you're too stoic, and you're too whatever to come up to and chat with, you're not going to find out what's going on in your organization. If they sense that you've got a sense of humor, and that you'll talk to them, and that you'll listen to them, you're going to find out a whole lot more about your organization, and your organization will just be a hell of a lot better off if you've got a sense of humor.
One question, Admiral, I was thinking about your. I think you became a SEAL in the late 70s. You obviously served up until just recently. The late 70s. That was the Desert One mission to get the hostages in Iran. Contrast that with the successful mission to get Osama bin Laden. What are your takeaways about that 30-year period where the U.S. military seemed to go from, not being in a good place, both internally and externally, to being one of the most respected and competent organizations on the planet? What were some of your takeaways in there as you guys changed the culture and changed the whole organization?
Yeah, Maynard, it had, and to your point, I came in 1977. And in fact, the SEAL teams back then, we felt like we were reasonably well funded, but in reality, we had a lot of ammunition, but that was about it. We were still carrying, Vietnam era, and actually in some cases, Korean vintage gear around with us. What happened with Desert One was that all of a sudden there was this epiphany that if the United States was going to have a good special operations community, we had to really invest in it. This, in 1987, the Congress actually established through the Goldwater-Nichols Act the U.S. Special Operations Command. And there was a lot of resentment because when I came into the Navy SEALs worked for the Navy. The Army Green Beret worked for the Army. The Air Force Special Operations worked for the Air Force, and there was no Marine Special Operations at the time. But the services, the Navy, they weren't, it's not that they didn't care about the SEALs, but they were investing in ships and submarines and aircraft carriers. So we were kind of at the bottom of the rung, and I would offer the Army to kind of do the same thing. Well, in 1987, when we established U.S. Special Operations Command, the whole role of that 4-star position was to take care of this joint community, joint being the operative word. So instead of, the SEALs reporting up through the Navy chain of command, we had an administrative chain of command, but operationally we belonged to SOCOM. So and then of course the Reagan years hit, money got put in. And so what you saw in the 30 years was this professionalism, this investment, this increase in the standards, expectations increased, the criteria to get into the SEALs and the Green Beret and others got harder and harder. The quality of the people coming in got better. And so by the time 9/11 came along, frankly, we were pretty doggone good. 9/11 happens, and I would offer, as troubling and as bad as the war was, today we are the finest military in the history of the world. And I don't say that hyperbolically. The fact of the matter is, when you think back on the great militaries of the world, you go as far back as the Roman legions, nobody has been in combat as long as these young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, particularly the 9/11 babies. These kids that signed up right after 9/11, they have been in the special operations community, but also more broadly, they have been at war for 20 years. They hone their skills. So when you compare it, and in fact, during the bin Laden raid, Bob Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense, he had been there during Desert One. Secretary Gates was not in favor of the raid, but I always tell folks the story. While he didn't vote in favor of the raid, I went to him at one point in time and said, "Hey, sir, I work for you. If you don't want me to, offer the raid up as an option, I won't do that." And Gates, to his credit, said, "No, Bill," he said, "the president needs to have all the options available. I don't support the raid, but he's got to hear this. He's got to decide whether that's going to be one of his options." But at one point in time, Gates told me, he said, "The reason I'm not supporting it is because I saw what happened in Desert One. I was in the White House. I lived through that." And of course, I said, "Hey, sir, we've gotten a little bit better since Desert One." Of course, first thing that happens is a helicopter goes down in the compound in Abbottabad, but we had a plan to deal with that. So, yeah, we got better, but it was better through just hard work and, good resources, great people.
But you think one thing as you tell the raid on bin Laden, it's striking relative to Desert One. As I understand Desert One, the White House was heavily involved in almost every aspect. And it was clear in the bin Laden raid, the White House and Leon Panetta were saying to you, plan it, execute it, you're the man. And that, when you empower people, you get better results.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think a lot of this resulted, though, recognized by this time I had been in my job as the JSOC commander for almost 3 full years. I had also been the deputy at JSOC for 3 years before that. So I had a tremendous amount of experience. I had also worked in the Bush White House for 2 years. So I understood how the process worked. But because we had been successful on a number of missions that the public will never hear about, the president had a lot of faith and confidence in my guys. And so he understood when he made the decision, and again, I had to brief him on the plan that I came up with, but once he said, hey, you're good to go, then the president, again, this is why I give him great credit, but Bush did the same thing, was, hey, you are the military commander. And even though I reported to Leon Panetta absolutely understood. In fact, he made a record for the memorandum that it's now in McRaven's hands. And so to your point, Maynard, they empowered me to do the mission the way I felt best based on, my 30 plus years of experience at the time. And I give them great credit for giving me the latitude to do that, for accepting the risk of, and for trusting me on it.
Admiral, we're also at war right now with a virus, and with all the lessons that we learned about how to get logistics and systems together to get us to where we got to in the 1990s, as you look at how information flow about the virus is getting to all of us, how do you think about that? It seems like there's a private website at Johns Hopkins University that's sort of taken the role that normally would have been held by the CDC or some more central command. And if you were in charge of this process, what would you change and how would you fix it?
That's a bit of a loaded question, Colin. I will tell you that, to my way of thinking, any good Army captain could have coordinated this better than it's being coordinated out of the White House. And I hate to say that, but this is logistics and coordination 101. The fact of the matter is, much like the bin Laden raid, you have to put somebody in charge. You have to give them the resource to do the job. And it probably needed to come out of either the CDC or the White House. I'm okay with the White House having the task force, but I would have set up a command center. And again, I'm speaking a little bit out of the left side of my mouth because I don't know what it looks like from the standpoint of the task force. But at the end of the day, when I think of, commanding, the fact of the matter is you have to have a command center. I would have had, like I have at my, my military command centers, where I had 50 flat panel displays, where I could talk to every governor, where I had statistics on every event that was happening, where my intelligence professionals would drill down from the federal level all the way down to the local municipalities. I would want data. I would want to be able to coordinate that data. I would understand, the shortages of PPE. I would understand exactly where the shortfalls were across the nation. And then you begin to coordinate. And you've got to have a federal mandate on things. Wear a goddamn mask. How hard is that? It's a simple thing to do, but when you don't have the leadership coming out of the White House to say, look, these are some simple things and I want everyone to do it, then you're not going to be able to solve this problem. Now we're in a situation where you have this kind of federated approach, all the states kind of having their own approach to it, and frankly, all the cities within the states to some degree have their own approach to it. You can't run the United States of America. You can't have a federal response that looks like, 1,000 disparate approaches to it. So, but right now, kind of back to Pearl Harbor, it's, that's behind us. One of these days, the forensics will be done and people can do all the pointing they want. At this point in time, we have to see where we're at. We've got to come together in a very bipartisan way. I don't think it's too late to have a concerted and a coordinated federal response, but somebody in the White House is going to have to step up and say, okay, boys and girls, we're back to kind of square one. Here's how we're going to do it. People are just going to have to accept the fact that we've made some mistakes. I will tell you, here in Texas, he said, okay, time out. We're going to go back. We're going to start wearing masks. We're going to have separation. To Greg Abbott's credit, I know that was not an easy thing for him to do. Politically, probably personally, he was going to take a lot of heat for it, but it was the right thing to do. I don't see that happening in a lot of other areas. But so much of this stems from, hey, if you are the commander-in-chief, then command. You're not the administrator-in-chief, you're the commander-in-chief. You have to be able to get out there and command. People have got to follow you because you inspire them. you motivate them, and you manage them. And that just hasn't been happening. But if you want me to get up on my soapbox and talk some more, Colin, I'm happy to do that.
No, we're extending the session. This is fantastic. I guess one question, Admiral, is it seems like you were just hitting on it, is with the Governor Abbott example. The reason he changes course, says, alters the plan. Politically, it might be easier not to do that, but fundamentally, people make choices like that because they care.
Yeah.
And it seems like either we're communicating to our leaders, it's okay that you don't care, or we got the wrong people in there, but somehow it's becoming acceptable to be a selfish leader, and you can't be a good selfish leader. Is that oversimplifying? Is it better than we think? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a fundamental tenet of at least military leadership is this idea of servant leadership. Your responsibility is to the people that work for you. And, leadership is easy. It's kind of a simple idea. It's how do you get a mission accomplished with the people you have? That's it. I mean, you got a mission, you got people, you got to inspire, you got to motivate, you've got to organize them, you've got to manage them, but you've got to get them to accomplish a mission. The harder the mission, the better the leader you need. But in every case, if you think leadership is about you, if you believe it's about your success and your ego, you're probably not going to be a very good leader because you're not going to be able to inspire the people that work for you. This is servant leadership. You get the people, you listen to them, you provide them the resources, you provide them kind of the strategic plan for achieving the mission, and you've got to empower them to do the job. Now, again, every once in a while, you got to wire brush them, you got to keep them on the straight and narrow. But servant leadership is an important part of this. And there's a great quote from the Pope that says, "A shepherd should smell like his sheep." And I always like that. A shepherd should smell like his sheep. And the implications being, you better be down there with the troops. You better understand what's going on the front line. You better be listening. You better be, again, making sure you're in a position to help the people that are going to allow you to achieve this success in the mission. And as I said, to Governor Abbott's credit, I think he has really stepped up and done the right thing. I wish him the best. We're obviously in a tough place here in Texas, as they are in Florida and Arizona and California, a lot of other places. I hope we can turn this around.
When you think about the world geopolitically, and you obviously spent your entire career thinking about risks to the country and how we respond in certain situations and all of that. One thing that strikes us in the energy world is, given what America has done in shale, we don't have to think about the Mideast in the same terms that we might have had to during so much of your career. And then, of course, China seems to be maybe we're heading towards a bit of a new Cold War with China. Could you just talk about those two aspects of military security today and how you think about both of those factors?
Yeah, well, let me, I guess, kind of start with China. I do think we're heading towards a little bit of a Cold War. The problem is, right now we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back because we're not accepting, global leadership. We have retreated from being global leaders. And by that, I mean, if you're going to be a global leader, you need to build alliances. The one thing that could kind of stop the momentum that China's got is if, we stayed with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and continued to strengthen those alliances. We've got to strengthen our NATO alliances. We have to, NATO, because if we don't have strong NATO alliances, then they may turn to Russia, or they may turn to China. We need to strengthen our alliances with the African communities. I mean, the global leadership is about partnership and recognizing that even the small countries have some value in that. So when we start talking about China, for example, the thing about the Chinese is, one, they have a long plan. They've always had the long plan. Whereas the best thing about democracy, and sometimes the worst thing, is about every 4 years or every 8 years we turn over, new plan gets built, and away we go. The Chinese don't have to worry about that. Xi Jinping is in it for the long haul, and they've had this long plan that he picked up from his predecessor, and he will pass off eventually to his successor. But their plan is not necessarily a global plan. Right now, they are kind of thinking about how do you feed the 1.4 billion people that are in China. They're also thinking about dominating the Pacific. So militarily, we talk about our ability to project power. And it is the Navy that really does the power projection for the United States. So to give you a sense, the first thing you want to know as the president is, where are my aircraft carriers? Well, right now, we have 11 carrier battle groups. And you think, that's a lot of firepower, 11 carrier battle groups. But you have to do the Navy math. And the Navy math basically is it says 3 carriers to make 1, because you're going to have one that's on deployment, one that's in refit, it's coming back, it's in dry dock, one that's in workup. So for all 3 of those, so the bottom line is you'll have 3 or 4 carrier battle groups at any one point in time. But of those 3 or 4 carrier battle groups, they are spread out across the globe. They are not just concentrating on the Pacific. The Chinese, all they care about is the South China Sea and the East China Sea and the Sea of Japan. They care about their pond. So quantity has a quality all its own. They don't have to have 11 carrier battle groups. They've just got enough to confront us in the Pacific. I'm not worried that we're going to go to a shooting war. I do applaud the administration, the Trump administration, for kind of holding the Chinese feet to the fire. I think they're not following the basic guidelines from the WTO. They're not doing anything right. So I'm okay with holding the feet to the fire. I'm not sure I would have done it with tariffs. That's another issue. But I guess, I'll make this a little bit shorter here. My biggest concern with China is when I look at the amount of money they are investing into AI, what they are investing into machine learning, we're still ahead right now, but 10 years from now, if we're not careful, the Chinese will surpass us. The Chinese Belt and Road efforts out there to ensure that they've got the resources coming in to take care of the 1.4 billion people. We don't have anything like that. We're not countering the Chinese effort globally because we've retreated. So I do worry about that. In terms of the Middle East, the Middle East is no longer about oil per se, but the Middle East is about the Middle East. It is always a strategic place because it may not be about our oil, but oil coming through the Straits of Hormuz still has an impact on us because the world remains very flat. And if oil doesn't move out of the Straits of Hormuz to support the rest of the world, then it's going to affect us. If Saudi Arabia and Iran get into a dust-up, it's going to affect us. If Yemen and Saudi Arabia can't get things squared away, it's going to affect us. What I try to tell people is, if you think that what happens in a mud hut in Somalia doesn't matter to the farmers in Iowa, then you don't understand how the world works today. The fact of the matter is, some terrorist in Yemen or in Somalia building a bomb right now, the underwear bomber, the cartridge bomber that they put on a flight going to Europe or going to the United States, if that blows up a plane and kills 150 people, it shuts down the airline industry. In addition to the lives lost, the economic impact is huge. And before long, you have this cascading effect across a whole lot of things. So people in places that you can't even find on the map, they matter. And we need to pay attention to that. The only way you pay attention is by having alliances. The only way you have alliances is by leading from the front.
Admiral, you've mentioned a topic that's been pretty thematic as we've talked through multiple of these close of business day discussions, which is the divide that has emerged in the U.S. And I think whether you're talking to investors or you're talking to politicians or you're talking to industry participants, there is a great desire to see that divide close and the United States to come back to more of a unified front. And just given your multiple administrations that you've worked for and lived through, I was wondering if there are 2 to 3 pieces of advice that you might have for potentially looking forward instead of looking backward and potentially seeing some improvement and healing on the horizon around that topic.
Yeah, great question. The first thing you're going to have is, frankly, a leader that is not a leader of a party. It does start at the top. It's like any organization. If you're the CEO or the president of an organization, you set the tone for the culture of the organization. Everybody that's ever been in a leadership position, I don't care if you're working in an office of 5 people or you're got 500,000 people, you set the tone. If what you do is moral, legal, and ethical, that culture will become part of the organization. So it has to start, in my opinion, with the president, recognizing that I'm the president of the United States of America. Now, that doesn't mean all of a sudden, miraculously, the left and the right come together and they do kumbaya. But what will happen, I think, is you'll begin to isolate the fringes out there a lot more, because most people want to come to the center. I was talking to Maynard ahead of time. I've got two marvelous sisters. They are great sisters, older sisters. One is on the far right and one is on the far left, but they are sisters. They love each other dearly. We have, as you can imagine, these great kind of family conversations, because I'm like right in the middle, but they will come together for family. And they have great discussions, and it's never, it's never caustic. It's the sort of discussions you would expect people to have that are more concerned about the welfare of America than the welfare of their particular position. So first and foremost, Matt, again, I think this is about having somebody that recognizes this is about America, not about a particular party. The next thing is, we've got to get the economy squared away. We've got to, I think, lift up. We've got to build a better middle class. Now, I think we have done that well, but obviously the economic disparity. Capitalism has raised all boats. I was reading a great article in Forbes the other day about starting from the 1900s to today, the number of people that capitalism has lifted out of poverty in the last 100 years. I mean, it is an economic miracle, and we need to continue to focus on capitalism. But capitalism isn't perfect. You got to still continue to, I think, work around the edges. We've got to, in the United States, I think we've got to kind of close the gap between the middle class and the lower class. We've got to bring the lower class up to the point where we've got a larger middle class, and maybe buy down a little bit of the economic disparities. Now, of course, with COVID, we have this additional $1 trillion that we continue to add onto the debt. And I know, my time on the board, I'm learning this, and I'm on another board with some former secretaries of the Treasury, and they keep kind of telling me, well, you don't necessarily have to worry about the debt, which I can't get my head around, because, I know, when I look at a balance sheet, if my debt is a whole lot better than my GDP in the United States, or, in what I'm earning, I got to believe that's going to be a problem. So I do think economically we're going to have to figure out a way to move the country forward, buy down a little bit of the debt. And then finally, I'm a big believer in education. I'm often asked, what do you think the number one national security issue is? And people always think I'm going to answer, Iran or North Korea. And my answer is always the same: K through 12 education. And they say, no, I'm talking about, national security problem, K through 12 education. If we don't take the time to educate the youth of America and teach them to think critically, to give them the STEM skills they're going to need, to teach them about, new ideas and new cultures, then we're not going to have the people we need to lead the nation on the national security issues. So if we're going to bring the country back together, we need to educate the youth of America. We need to give them the skill set. We need to have a strong economy. And then we've got to have somebody in the White House that understands it's about the United States of America and not about a party. Now, maybe that's maybe all those are bridges too far, but that's what I think we could do to kind of heal the wounds that we're dealing with right now.
Well, all of us have been so thrilled to visit with you, Admiral. I know we've got questions in our back pocket that we'll just leave them there, because what you just ended with is exactly what we needed today. So I want to thank Arjun Murdy. He got us to you. He's a good friend, a good man, and without him, we wouldn't be having today's discussion. So Arjun, if you're watching this, thank you. I want to thank everybody who keeps watching. We enjoy your comments and thoughts, and we're actually going to attach a survey to this week's blast. So please let us know what you're thinking. But I saved a big thank you for last, Admiral, which is thank you for everything you've done for the country, and thank you for spending time with us, and thank you with closing with those thoughts, because that is just what the doctor ordered. And let's hope that we all get up in the morning, we'll make our bed, and we'll go make all that great stuff happen. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Maynard. It's been great to be with you guys today. Thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Take care.